Welcome to The Social Lens, the podcast where we explore the fascinating and sometimes troubling ways we relate to each other in the modern world. I'm your host, Beatrice Goodwin, and today we're diving deep into one of the most pressing issues of our time: social isolation. Let me start with a tough question. You're scrolling through your phone, connected to billions of people around the globe, yet somehow feeling more alone than ever. You have hundreds of friends on social media, but struggle to find someone to grab coffee with on a Tuesday afternoon. Sound familiar? You're not alone in feeling alone, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We're living through what I call the loneliness paradox, a time when we have unprecedented access to human connection, yet rates of social isolation are skyrocketing. Today, we'll journey through 6 interconnected stories that reveal how we're accidentally building walls instead of bridges, and surprisingly, how some of our deepest challenges might actually hold the keys to genuine connection. Interested in learning more about everything that goes behind the human emotions facade? Download the Scoob app now for free from App Store or Play Store. Venture into 1,000 plus AI-powered podcasts that feed your curiosity and fit your busy schedule. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the internet. We were promised a global village, a world where distance didn't matter and knowledge flowed freely. And in many ways, that promise was kept. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. The same technology that gave us unlimited access to information and global communication might be systematically dismantling our ability to have the kind of deep, meaningful conversations that actually bind us together. Think about your last truly profound conversation. I'm talking about the kind where you lose track of time, where you feel genuinely understood, where you walk away feeling more connected to another human being. When was the last time that happened? And more importantly, was it mediated by a screen? We're witnessing something unprecedented in human history. The millennial generation, and increasingly Gen Z, finds itself caught in a psychological tug-of-war. On one side, there's this pull toward personal fame, toward crafting the perfect online persona, toward the intoxicating rush of likes and shares and viral moments. It's a kind of collective narcissism that's never existed before, where everyone can be their own broadcaster, their own celebrity. But here's what's fascinating. This same generation is also dedicating itself to community service and social justice in ways that would make previous generations proud. They're torn between two powerful forces: the empathetic drive to help others and the narcissistic pull of digital validation. Most people are gravitating toward one extreme or the other, creating this split that's defining an entire generation. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The economic challenges we're facing, the slow, grinding decline of traditional industrial jobs, the gig economy, the housing crisis, these pressures are actually starting to suppress that narcissistic inclination. When personal and collective survival becomes the priority, the allure of digital grandeur starts to feel not just empty, but almost absurdly disconnected from reality. But economic pressure is a double-edged sword. History shows us that when times get tough, societies can go one of two ways. We can turn inward, become xenophobic, start blaming the other for our problems. Political rhetoric targeting minorities and different cultures as inferior or subhuman. We've seen this movie before, and it doesn't end well. Or, and this is the hopeful path, we can recognize our shared struggles and develop what I call empathetic awareness. We can realize that we're all in this together, that the person struggling to pay rent in New York has more in common with someone facing the same challenge in Mumbai than either of them has with the ultra-wealthy in their own cities. The Great Depression actually provides a fascinating case study. Despite the unimaginable hardship, many communities saw an explosion of mutual aid, neighbors helping neighbors, a genuine sense of collective responsibility that had been eroded during the prosperous 1920s. The question is, can we fast-track ourselves into what some economists are calling the third industrial revolution? This wouldn't be about more technology for technology's sake, but about creating decentralized, collaborative systems that prioritize collective well-being over individual accumulation, that focus on quality of life and planetary sustainability rather than endless growth. Because here's the thing about our current trajectory: our increasing empathy and global awareness has been built on an accelerating flow of energy and resources through increasingly complex systems. But that complexity comes with a hidden cost, what physicists call entropy. The more complex our systems become, the more energy they require just to maintain themselves. The economic downturn we're experiencing isn't just a temporary blip, it's forcing a global recalibration of what we consider a good life. While wealthy individuals are adjusting to reduced circumstances, those who were already vulnerable are being pushed to the very margins of survival. But here's the unexpected opportunity buried in this crisis. It might force all of us to rediscover what actually makes life fulfilling. Even before the current economic pressures, millions of people were already choosing to simplify their lives voluntarily. They were finding satisfaction in the quality of their relationships rather than the quantity of their possessions. Psychologists and sociologists have been documenting this for decades. After you meet your basic needs and achieve a reasonably comfortable lifestyle, additional wealth actually starts to decrease happiness and life satisfaction. Now, as people are involuntarily downsizing due to economic pressures, we have a unique opportunity to collectively redefine what we're actually pursuing. Instead of accumulating material wealth, we could focus on building social capital. Instead of competing for market dominance, we could prioritize meaningful relationships. This transition won't be easy, and it certainly won't be automatic. But challenging times, provided they don't become completely catastrophic, often catalyze a revival of civil society. They can ignite what I call an empathetic resurgence, millions of people becoming more attuned to their shared struggles and actively engaging in mutual support. The digital tools that have been isolating us could actually become the infrastructure for this new kind of connection, if we learn to use them differently. Speaking of using our communication tools differently, let's talk about one of the most counterintuitive ways we sabotage our own relationships: overventing. We've all been there. Something goes wrong. Maybe it's work stress, relationship drama, family issues, and we turn to our friends for support. That's natural, right? That's what friends are for. And you're absolutely correct. Discussing our difficulties with others isn't inherently problematic. When handled appropriately, sharing can be incredibly beneficial in bonding. But here's where things get tricky. There's a significant irony hiding in plain sight. While we approach trusted friends hoping for comfort and relief, the act of continually burdening them with our negative thoughts can actually drive these very people away. Think about it from the listener's perspective. Even the most loving, patient person in your life has a finite capacity for absorbing someone else's problems. It's like emotional bandwidth. Everyone has limits. When we're caught up in our own mental chatter, we often become less attuned to the social signals that would normally prompt us to change the subject or ask how the other person is doing. Healthy relationships depend on reciprocal listening, a delicate balance that professional therapists maintain by charging for their time and maintaining clear boundaries. Friends naturally uphold this principle too, but without the formal structure. When that conversational equilibrium gets disrupted, it can seriously damage social bonds. Here's a study that perfectly illustrates this dynamic. Researchers tracked over 1,000 middle school students for 7 months. They found that students who tended to ruminate, those kids who couldn't stop replaying problems in their heads, were more inclined to pull their peers into their swirling thoughts compared to kids who didn't overthink as much. You might expect that seeking more support would lead to better outcomes, right? Wrong. These adolescents experienced increased social exclusion. They became the subjects of gossip and rumors. Some even faced threats of violence. Their attempts to connect through sharing their problems actually made them more isolated. And this pattern doesn't magically disappear when we become adults. In fact, Having seemingly legitimate reasons for excessive venting, like grief, doesn't protect us from the social fallout. Researchers studied adults who were mourning significant losses and found something heartbreaking. While people prone to rumination did indeed seek more social support following their loss, they also encountered more friction in their relationships over time and received less emotional support, not more. The cruel irony is that the people who most need social support often engage in behaviors that push that support away. But there's another danger lurking here that goes beyond just annoying our friends. Excessive rumination can actually fuel aggression. When we fixate on conflicts, replaying them over and over, we're not processing and moving on. We're keeping the emotional wound fresh and raw. Experiments have shown that people who were prompted to ruminate about being insulted subsequently exhibited more hostility toward their aggressor. When given opportunities to retaliate, like administering loud, uncomfortable noises to the person who had insulted them, the ruminators were significantly more likely to do so compared to people who didn't dwell on the incident. This means that by clinging to our grievances, we're not just keeping resentment alive. We're making ourselves more likely to act aggressively. Even worse, this aggression often gets misdirected. We snap at family members after a bad day at work. We project our frustrations onto colleagues and friends who don't deserve it. So what's the solution? How do we seek support without falling into the overventing trap? The key is developing what psychologists call emotional regulation, the ability to recognize when we're spiraling and to consciously shift our focus. This doesn't mean bottling up emotions or pretending everything is fine. It means learning to share our struggles in ways that invite genuine connection rather than one-sided dumping. It means asking ourselves, am I sharing this because I want to connect and potentially find solutions, or am I just looking for someone to absorb my negative energy? It means checking in with our friends about their own lives, remembering that relationships are supposed to be mutual exchanges of support. Most importantly, it means recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our relationships is to process our emotions in other ways first, through journaling, therapy, physical exercise, or meditation, so that when we do share with friends, we're coming from a place of connection rather than desperation. Now let's turn our attention to a form of social isolation that often gets misunderstood or overlooked entirely: the experience of shy people and introverts in a world that seems designed for extroverts. Many people who struggle socially aren't lacking in charm or social skills. They're held back by internal barriers. In familiar settings, they might be delightful and engaging. But when faced with new social situations, they hit invisible walls built from shyness, anxiety, insecurity, and what I call pessimistic thought patterns. Shyness is particularly complex because it exists on such a wide spectrum. At the mild end, you have people who appear completely functional and even charming on the outside. They harbor internal worries and insecurities, but they manage to engage with others, though it's mentally exhausting because they're constantly battling self-doubt. Move toward the middle of the spectrum, and you find people who are noticeably quieter and more hesitant in social gatherings, but still manage to navigate these situations to some extent. At the severe end, shyness can lead to complete withdrawal from social interactions. These individuals become almost invisible in social spaces, present in body but absent in participation. What's driving this? The cognitive patterns that sustain shyness are fascinating and heartbreaking. Shy people tend to catastrophize the risks of social engagement. They view others as overly critical and themselves as fundamentally inadequate. Every interaction becomes a high-stakes evaluation of their worth as a person. They become hypersensitive to perceived rejection or hostility, reading meaning into every micro-expression, every pause in conversation. She only laughed a little at my joke. She must dislike me. He complimented my hat. He's probably mocking me. They replay interactions years later, harshly judging themselves for supposed missteps that probably nobody else even noticed. But shyness, difficult as it is, represents just one piece of a larger puzzle. We need to talk about what psychologist Susan Cain calls the extrovert ideal, the pervasive cultural belief that the ideal person is outgoing, assertive, and comfortable in the spotlight. This ideal suggests that the best people prefer action over contemplation, risk-taking over caution, certainty over doubt. They make quick decisions even if it means making mistakes. They excel in team settings and thrive in group social situations. Now, we often hear that our society values individuality, but there's a catch. This admiration is typically reserved for individuals who are comfortable performing that individuality in public. Yes, we occasionally celebrate the technological innovators who emerge from solitude, the garage entrepreneurs who build empires, but they're exceptions, and usually only after they've achieved massive financial success. In this cultural context, introversion has been relegated to second-class status. Traits like sensitivity, seriousness, and yes, shyness, are often viewed with disappointment or misunderstanding. It's similar to how women's contributions were historically undervalued in male-dominated societies. Certain personality types are systemically devalued simply because they don't match the dominant cultural template. The research backing this up is striking. People who talk more are perceived as more intelligent, attractive, interesting, and desirable as friends, regardless of the actual quality of what they're saying. Both the speed and volume of speech significantly influence how others perceive competence and likability. Fast talkers are seen as more capable than slower speakers. In group settings, the most vocal participants are considered more intelligent than the quiet ones, despite there being absolutely no correlation between how much someone talks and the quality of their ideas. Think about how many meetings you've sat through where the loudest voice dominated, while potentially brilliant insights from quieter team members went unheard. The word introvert itself carries negative baggage. Psychologist Lori Helgo conducted an informal survey that revealed something telling. While introverts used vivid, positive language to describe their own physical characteristics, green-blue eyes, exotic, high cheekbones, they described a generic introvert in much less flattering terms: ungainly, neutral colors, skin problems. Even introverts have internalized the cultural bias against introversion. But here's what we're missing when we uncritically embrace the extrovert ideal. Some of humanity's most brilliant contributions have come from people who were introspective and contemplative. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, Vincent van Gogh's revolutionary art, the invention of the personal computer, these world-changing innovations emerged from people who were comfortable delving into their inner worlds to uncover insights that more externally focused individuals might have missed. Without the contributions of introverts and shy people, we'd lose some of the most pivotal advancements in art, science, and technology that continue to shape our world. We'd lose the deep thinkers, the careful observers, the people who notice what others miss because they're not busy performing for an audience. The tragedy is that our culture's preference for extroversion isn't just unfair, it's wasteful. We're systematically discouraging and underutilizing roughly half the population. We're creating environments where people feel compelled to exhaust themselves trying to be someone they're not, rather than developing systems that harness the unique strengths that come with different personality types. And for the shy and introverted individuals navigating this landscape, the constant pressure to conform to extroverted norms can be profoundly isolating. They're not just dealing with their natural social challenges, they're also fighting against a culture that suggests their way of being in the world is somehow inferior. Let's shift gears and talk about something that might make you uncomfortable: the role that physical attractiveness plays in social isolation. Before you dismiss this as superficial, stick with me, because the dynamics at play reveal something profound about human psychology and the ways we unconsciously organize our social world. Here's a fascinating phenomenon. When people gather in large groups, Observers form opinions about individuals based on the collective impression of the group rather than individual characteristics. This creates what researchers call the law of association, and it has some counterintuitive implications. If someone who considers themselves less physically attractive wants to be perceived as more appealing, they can actually enhance their perceived attractiveness by aligning themselves with a group of attractive individuals. The group's overall appeal lifts everyone within it. But here's the flip side. An inherently attractive person might see their perceived attractiveness decrease if they consistently socialize with people considered less attractive. Sound familiar? It should, because these dynamics mirror the popularity hierarchies we remember from high school. But here's the thing. We never actually outgrow them. In both personal and professional environments, aligning yourself with influential, successful, or attractive people can bolster your own image and opportunities. The people you choose to associate with become part of how others perceive you. But the law of association changes dramatically when we shift from large groups to smaller settings. When someone is accompanied by just one or two others, different dynamics emerge. In these intimate settings, if you want to appear more attractive, you might actually benefit from spending time with companions who are perceived as less attractive. The contrast effect works in your favor. This principle extends beyond physical appearance into consumer psychology. Potential homebuyers might be perfectly content with their homes until they visit elegant model homes. Suddenly, their satisfaction plummets as they unfavorably compare their reality to the sophisticated ideal they've just seen. But there's something even more fundamental at play here, something I call the law of self-esteem. People are naturally drawn to individuals who exhibit high self-esteem. These individuals find it easier to make and sustain relationships because of their inherent confidence and ease in social scenarios. Think about the people in your life who seem effortlessly social. They're comfortable being in the spotlight. They're open about sharing personal details, which fosters deeper connections. Most importantly, they view rejection as a normal part of life, not as a referendum on their fundamental worth as human beings. Contrast this with people who have low self-esteem. They often hesitate to open up, using reticence as a defense mechanism to protect themselves from potential criticism and rejection. But here's the cruel irony. This fear of self-disclosure, intended to prevent rejection, often results in the very rejection they're trying to avoid. By withholding themselves, they prevent the establishment of deeper relationships. It's like building a wall to protect yourself from attack, only to realize that the wall also keeps out everyone who might want to be your ally. This creates a self-perpetuating cycle. People with low self-esteem protect themselves by sharing less, which makes others less likely to connect with them, which reinforces their belief that they are not worth knowing, which makes them even more protective and withdrawn. Meanwhile, people with high self-esteem put themselves out there, experience both acceptance and rejection, but interpret the rejection as information about compatibility rather than as evidence of their unworthiness. This resilience allows them to keep trying, which leads to more connections, which reinforces their positive self-image. But here's what's really important to understand. This isn't just about individual psychology. These dynamics reveal how our social structures systematically advantage certain types of people while disadvantaging others. If you happen to be conventionally attractive and naturally confident, you're swimming downstream in the river of social interaction. Opportunities come more easily. People give you the benefit of the doubt. Your ideas are taken more seriously. You get invited to more events, included in more conversations, offered more chances to prove yourself. If you're less conventionally attractive or struggle with confidence, you're swimming upstream. Every social interaction requires more effort. You have to work harder to be heard, to be included, to be given chances. The same behavior that seems charming in a confident, attractive person might be perceived as awkward or off-putting, coming from someone who doesn't fit the conventional mold. This isn't anyone's fault exactly. These biases are largely unconscious and universal. But recognizing them is crucial. both for individuals navigating these dynamics and for organizations and communities trying to create more inclusive environments. For individuals struggling with these issues, the path forward isn't about trying to become someone you're not. It's about understanding the game being played and finding ways to work within and around these dynamics while building genuine self-esteem based on your actual strengths and values. For all of us, it's about developing awareness of our unconscious biases and making deliberate efforts to look beyond surface-level characteristics when forming judgments about others. Because here's the thing, the most interesting, creative, and valuable people aren't always the ones who look the part or immediately command attention in a crowded room. Now let's dive into the fascinating science behind human connection itself. There's a remarkable molecule floating around in your brain right now that influences almost every social interaction you have. It's called oxytocin, and understanding how it works might fundamentally change how you think about relationships and social isolation. Oxytocin has been nicknamed the love hormone and the bonding chemical, and for good reason. When researchers administer oxytocin to study participants, remarkable things happen. People become better at recognizing emotions in others. They display increased trust, even toward strangers. Their ability to form social connections improves dramatically. Here's a typical experiment. Participants watch politicians delivering speeches. For half the speeches, they're under the influence of oxytocin, and for the other half, they receive a placebo. They don't know which they're getting at any given time. When asked afterward which politician they trust more or would be more likely to vote for, they consistently choose the ones they watched while oxytocin was active in their systems. Think about that for a moment. A single molecule can influence something as complex as political preference and trust, not through rational analysis, but through enhanced social bonding. But oxytocin's role goes far beyond laboratory experiments. There's compelling evidence that it plays a crucial role in health and healing. People who receive social support during illness, characterized by simple acts of care and nurturing, tend to recover more completely and quickly than those who face illness alone. This isn't just psychological comfort we're talking about. The presence of social contact during sickness triggers the release of oxytocin, which helps improve health outcomes by reducing stress and lowering cortisol levels. Cortisol, as you might know, is a hormone that can severely compromise immune system function when present in chronic high levels. But here's where oxytocin gets really interesting. It doesn't just flood our systems when we're receiving social support. It also increases during periods when we're lacking social support or experiencing poor social interactions. At first, this seemed contradictory to researchers. Why would the bonding hormone spike when bonds are absent or strained? The answer reveals something profound about human nature. Oxytocin may serve as a biological distress signal, encouraging us to seek social engagement when we need it most. It's our body's way of saying, hey, you need connection right now. This dual function has led to a new understanding of oxytocin. Rather than simply being the love drug, researchers now think of it as a social information regulator. It doesn't just create positive feelings. It makes social information more prominent and emotionally salient, whether that information is positive or negative. In the right context, with the right people, oxytocin enhances bonding and trust. But in threatening or ambiguous social situations, it can actually heighten anxiety and defensive responses. It's not inherently good or bad. It's an amplifier for whatever social dynamics are already in play. This research has exciting implications for treating social isolation and anxiety. Preliminary studies suggest that oxytocin pharmacotherapy, basically treating social disorders with supplemental oxytocin, might help people with social phobia, borderline personality disorder, and other conditions that involve difficulty forming and maintaining relationships. But you don't necessarily need pharmaceutical interventions to boost your oxytocin levels. One of the most accessible and enjoyable ways to increase oxytocin is through music. Whether you're listening to music or actively performing it, your oxytocin levels rise. This effect is particularly pronounced in group settings. Singing in a choir, playing in a band, or even just listening to live music with others can create powerful bonding experiences. This might explain why music has been central to human culture throughout history. From ancient tribal gatherings around fires to modern concert halls, from religious chants to protest songs, music has always been a technology for creating social cohesion. Now we understand part of the biological mechanism behind this universal human experience. Physical touch is another powerful oxytocin trigger. This doesn't have to be romantic or intimate. Even brief, appropriate physical contact like handshakes, hugs, or touches on the arm during conversation can increase oxytocin levels and enhance feelings of connection and trust. For people struggling with social isolation, this research offers both hope and practical strategies. It suggests that our capacity for connection isn't fixed. It's influenced by biology that we can, to some extent, learn to work with rather than against. Understanding oxytocin also helps explain why social isolation can become self-perpetuating. When we're isolated, our oxytocin system becomes hypersensitive. Social interactions that might feel comfortable to someone with regular social contact can feel overwhelming or threatening to someone who's been isolated for a long time. This can lead to withdrawal, which leads to more isolation, which makes future social interactions even more challenging. Breaking this cycle often requires patience and gradual exposure. It's like rebuilding social muscles that have atrophied. But the good news is that our bonding biology is designed to support connection. It wants to work. Sometimes we just need to create the right conditions for it to do its job. Let's now examine one of the most overlooked drivers of social isolation: economic hardship. When we think about what causes people to become socially isolated, we often focus on personality factors, mental health issues, or social skills. But there's overwhelming evidence that economic stress can be just as powerful a force in pushing people toward isolation. And the mechanisms are both predictable and heartbreaking. Withdrawal from stressful environments is a natural human response, especially when those environments feel insurmountable. When people face economic downturns, two particular behaviors emerge as common coping mechanisms: social isolation and excessive alcohol consumption. These aren't random responses. They're systematic ways of managing overwhelming stress. Social isolation during economic hardship initially isn't driven by shame or defensive needs. It's simpler than that. Unemployment and financial stress naturally decrease social engagements and connections outside of family. Social activities cost money. Going out with friends, maintaining certain lifestyle markers, participating in community events, all of these become luxuries that struggling families can't afford. But as economic hardship persists, the isolation begins serving a different function. It becomes a way to avoid negative judgment from others. Researchers studying families during economic crises found that many anticipated relationship failures with their neighbors and proactively withdrew socially to avoid perceived judgment about their reduced circumstances. This creates a particularly cruel dynamic. Just when people most need social support and community connection, economic pressures push them toward isolation. And just when they most need the emotional and practical benefits of friendship, they begin avoiding the very people who might offer help. Alcohol consumption compounds these problems in predictable ways. Drinking temporarily alleviates discomfort and depressive states while dampening social sensitivities. In the short term, it provides relief from the psychological pain of economic stress. But in the long term, it further isolates people by impairing their judgment, damaging their relationships, and creating additional problems that compound their original difficulties. Research from the Great Depression era provides a stark illustration of these dynamics. Among middle-class families, unemployment significantly affected parental social participation. Only half of unemployed middle-class parents remained moderately socially active, compared to 85% of those who maintained employment. Economic loss beyond unemployment, things like reduced income or lost savings, didn't have as dramatic an effect as complete job loss. Interestingly, the impact was different across social classes. Working-class families, who were continuously engaged in kinship-related activities and had different social expectations, showed no variation in participation levels due to job loss or economic strain. The marked impact of unemployment in the middle class aligned with the psychological strain related to status loss, a factor that affected this demographic more severely. The connection between unemployment and alcohol abuse was particularly stark. Nearly 40% of unemployed fathers during the Depression were described by their children as having drinking problems, compared to only 8% in families where the father remained employed. And here's the tragic part. Drinking often became both a cause and effect of continued joblessness. Fathers who increased their alcohol consumption after losing their jobs often found themselves unemployable even when the broader economic climate improved. But the effects of economic hardship extend far beyond individual families. Economic deprivation doesn't occur randomly. It follows patterns that reveal existing social inequalities and create new ones. During the 1930s, middle-class families led by entrepreneurial fathers were especially vulnerable to economic setbacks, as were working-class families with foreign-born fathers. The psychological impact varied significantly by social class. Among middle-class mothers, researchers noted substantial links between economic losses, unemployment, and feelings of dissatisfaction, insecurity, and fatigue. When economic deprivation coincided with having to move to lower-status neighborhoods, dissatisfaction increased dramatically. Downward mobility wasn't just about having less money. It was about losing social status and community standing. For children, the effects were profound and long-lasting. Parental unhappiness was particularly concerning to children, and economic deprivation intensified their perceptions of parental distress. Middle-class fathers in economically deprived families were viewed by their children as having lower social standing than fathers in non-deprived homes, highlighting how status loss affected entire family systems. Working-class families faced different but equally significant challenges. Their perceptions of distress didn't correlate as strongly with economic deprivation, likely because they were already dealing with economic struggles and had fewer visible status markers to lose. But the impact on family relationships was still substantial, particularly for children who had to take on adult responsibilities as families adapted to reduced circumstances. Perhaps most troubling, the effects of economic hardship often outlasted the economic crisis itself. Families that failed to regain their pre-depression status typically had fathers with unemployment histories, and heavy drinking contributed to this permanent status loss. The social isolation and coping mechanisms that initially helped families survive economic crisis sometimes prevented them from recovering, even when opportunities returned. This historical pattern has contemporary relevance. Economic disruption doesn't just create temporary hardship, it can fundamentally alter social networks, family dynamics, and community connections in ways that persist long after the immediate crisis has passed. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for both individuals facing economic hardship and communities trying to support them. Social isolation during economic stress isn't a personal failing. It's a predictable response to systemic pressures. And breaking the cycle requires more than just individual resilience. It requires community-level interventions that address both the economic and social dimensions of hardship. As we reach the end of our journey through the landscape of social isolation, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. What we've discovered isn't just a collection of separate problems. It's an interconnected web of challenges that reveals something profound about the human condition in the 21st century. We started with the digital paradox, how the technology that promised to connect us globally might be fragmenting our capacity for deep, local connection. We explored how our attempts to seek support through sharing can backfire when we don't understand the delicate balance of reciprocal relationship. We examined how cultural biases toward extroversion systematically disadvantage roughly half the population, and how the complex dynamics of attractiveness and self-esteem create invisible hierarchies that shape every social interaction. We delved into the fascinating biology of bonding, discovering that connection isn't just an emotional experience, but a chemical one, mediated by hormones like oxytocin that we can learn to work with rather than against. But here's what gives me hope. Understanding these dynamics empowers us to work with them instead of being unconsciously controlled by them. The digital tools that have been isolating us could become the infrastructure for new kinds of meaningful connection if we learn to use them as supplements to, rather than replacements for, face-to-face interaction. The economic pressures that are forcing lifestyle changes could catalyze a collective redefinition of what makes life fulfilling, shifting our focus from material accumulation to relationship building. The threads of isolation we've explored today, digital, emotional, cultural, economic, biological, are also the threads from which we can weave a new tapestry of human connection. We have the knowledge, we have the tools. Now we need the collective will to use them. Because at the end of the day, despite all our technological marvels and economic complexities, we remain fundamentally social creatures. Our health, happiness, and humanity depend on our connections with each other. And that's not a weakness to overcome, it's a strength to celebrate and cultivate. I'm your host, Beatrice Goodwin, and this has been yet another exciting episode of The Social Lens. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the loneliness paradox. Don't forget to download Scoob, your gateway to a range of AI-powered podcasts that span across categories like spirituality, emotions, mystery, and history, all for free. Download the app now from the App Store or Play Store and start your journey today. May you find the connections you seek and help others find theirs.